Coming up, curse tablets, voodoo dolls, and a Roman North African trial on charges of witchcraft. Welcome back to this series on a history of witchcraft and magic in Europe, and today we are covering the ancient Roman world. The title of this series is, of course, A History of Witchcraft and Magic in Europe, but I have to say we will be talking about North Africa quite a lot in this episode. The Roman Empire included a lot of North Africa, including modern Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia. And a lot of the evidence for magic from the Roman period comes from North Africa. So although this series is looking at witchcraft and magic in Europe, we are going to hear quite a lot about North Africa. And in particular, the trial we're going to look at takes place in North Africa. But it is a trial under Roman law. So it's still European law because it's Roman law, although the trial itself is taking place in North Africa. And the person on trial is North African, as well as Roman. So just for this one episode, it's a history of witchcraft and magic in Europe and North Africa. This is the biggest time span we're going to cover in a single episode in this series. Roman history covers nearly a millennium. It's huge. We're obviously not going to kind of look at all of it. We'll be sort of dipping in and out. Just very, very briefly, for anybody not familiar with Roman history, the main kind of time periods of Roman history are the monarchy, which is basically legendary, that is 753 BCE to about 509. Then we have the Republic, 509 BCE up to, and this is debatable, I'm going to plump for 27. I could do a whole video on that if you want one. But basically that is the period where Rome is technically a republic. It really functions more like an oligarchy, but technically it is a republic. It is also an empire in the sense that Rome is expanding and conquering and creating its empire during that period. Then we have the empire, which is about 27 BCE to about 476 CE and is further subdivided into three categories. So the empire is the point where Rome becomes ruled by a monarchy, by an emperor. So it already has the empire in the sense of having conquered a lot of other places before that point, but it becomes an empire in the sense of ruled by an emperor. And we usually subdivide the period of the empire into three. The early empire, which is 27 to AD 70 or 70 CE. That is the accession of the Emperor Vespasian following a year of civil war. The High Empire, which is 70 up to 284. That covers a politically stable period in the 2nd century CE and then a very politically unstable period in the 3rd century known as the 3rd century crisis. Emperor after emperor after emperor keep getting murdered and replacing each other. Some people start late antiquity with that, but I don't. Late antiquity is the final period of the Roman Empire. I start it at 284 with the accession of the Emperor Diocletian and the return of political stability following a period of chaos. So that is an enormous period of time, so much change in that time, and I'm sure in the future I'll do other videos focusing on aspects of witchcraft and magic and superstition and folklore and all sorts of other things in various more specific times and places in the Roman Empire. But this series is a broad survey of the history of witchcraft and magic in Europe. So we are going to look at the whole thing. We get our word magic originally from Persian, then it comes into Greek, then it comes into Latin, changing meaning as it switches into each different language. The word magos is a Persian priest, and you might be familiar with it from the Magi, or Magi, who are the Persian priests who followed a star to go and visit the baby Jesus in the Christian story of the Nativity. So if you're British, you might have taken part in nativity plays in primary school, and you may have been one of the three kings. They are not kings. Wise men is closer. Persian religion is very concerned with astrology and the movement of stars. So wise men isn't too far off, and that's why they follow a star to go and see the baby Jesus, because astrology is one of their specialisms as Persian priests. The Greeks, and then later the Romans, associated with Zoroastrianism with magic. The Greek word magia originally referred to the theology of the Persians, and then it gained this secondary meaning of what we might call magic, which is hard to define anyway in the first place, which is something I talked about in episode 1. This then became in Latin magia. the science of the Magi, the knowledge of the Magi, scientia means knowledge in Latin, but also magic and sorcery. So magic is associated with Persia and Persian religion, and particularly Zoroastrianism in the Greco-Roman mind, but then it also gains these other meanings of what we might recognize more as what we think of when we think of magic or sorcery, doing spells to try and get an effect, or divination, particularly by means of astrology. State Roman religion was very interested in divination, so it's not all divination is magic, but particularly astrology and some forms of divination that involve kind of spells or just kind of weirder rites. So like the fictional art of necromancy, which is raising the dead. I'm assuming that's fictional if anyone has raised the dead, and we're talking bodily corpses like zombies here, not a seance. If anyone has done that, let me know. But I'm going to assume that the bodily raising of a corpse to foretell the future is a fictional form, but that is associated with magic. So divination as a whole varies and can be part of religion, of proper state religion. The Roman word, the Latin word religio, means proper religion. It doesn't have to be state religion, but proper recognised religion that worships recognised gods in an appropriate and recognised way. Things that are not religio include things like Christianity, when it eventually appears in the Roman Empire. Worshipping an executed Jewish carpenter does not count as proper religion as far as the Romans are concerned. So a lot of the practices that come under the heading of magic are practices that are not proper religio. But divination isn't the only use of magic. It can also be used for curses, for protective amulets, for healing, for love magic, inverted commas. There's a lot of other purposes of magic than just divination. There's another Latin word that becomes very important, especially going forward into the medieval and early modern periods, which is maleficium. Maleficium's original meaning is evil deed, misdeed, wickedness, offence, or crime. But it becomes associated as time goes on with enchantment and sorcery. And this word continues to be used in legal definitions of magic for a very, very long time. We can read about a variety of magical practitioners in Roman period texts, and there is this continuing very interesting division where we mostly read about female practitioners if we're reading myth and legend and poetry and fiction, but most of the real life practitioners of magic that we know about are men. It's a very odd division. I don't think it means there weren't female magic practitioners in the Roman world. Some of the literature is talking about kind of stereotypical practitioners of magic, and I think they reflect real people who just aren't named. We don't know the specifics of the individuals, but they definitely existed. So I don't think magic was entirely the realm of men in the Roman world. But it is continuing this trope we saw in Greece, where female practitioners are the ones in everybody's heads, the stereotype, and all the kind of terrifying literary examples, all the very dramatic literary examples from myth and legend and poetry, they're all women. But the people, the individuals that we hear about who may or may not actually be practicing magic in the Roman world are men. These include people like a man called Simon Magus, Simon the Magician, who made his living as a kind of travelling itinerant magician. Similar examples, Apollonius of Tyana and Alexander the False Prophet, and Apuleius, a Roman North African from the 2nd century CE, whose trial we are going to be looking at a little bit later in the video. As in ancient Greece, one use of magic was what is usually referred to as love magic, can be referred to as erotic magic. Love magic appears in both literature, in fiction, and we have examples from real life. The more real they get, the less they have anything to do with love, I gotta tell you. In poetry and in novels of the Roman period, particularly the very end of the Republic, the beginning of the Empire, we have examples of spells being used to make someone fall in love with you, to curse someone who isn't in love with you, to make a man impotent, or to cure impotence. There's a novel called Satyricon from the 1st century CE by a writer called Petronius, which has a lot of references to this kind of magic. It's kind of a bawdy sex romp type novel, and there's all sorts of going to witches to cure impotence, and maybe you've been cursed and that's why you've got the problem in the first place and things like that. In Latin love poetry, the mistresses will often go to witches with medical problems or bad dreams or all sorts of things. So Latin love poetry of the 1st century BCE and into the 1st century CE is very concerned with extramarital relationships between men and women. Not always men and women. Tibullus writes some love poetry to young men, but mostly it's heterosexual relationships, but not marriages. It's between a man and a woman who is unsuitable as a wife, usually lower status woman, or a very high status woman who is married to somebody else. Here's just an example from the poetry of Tibullus. Still, your husband won't believe them. The truthful witch promised me that with her magic rites. I've seen her drawing stars down from the sky. Her chant turns back the course of the flowing river. Her spells split the ground, conjure ghosts from the tomb and summon dead bones from the glowing funeral pyre. Now she holds the infernal crew with magic hissing. Now sprinkling milk orders them to retreat. As she wishes, she dispels the cloud from the sombre sky. As she wishes, calls up snows to a summer world. They say she alone possesses Medea's fatal herbs. Only she has fully tamed the savage hounds of Hecate. She composed a spell for me that you can deceive with. Chant it 3 times, spit 3 times when you've done. Then he'll not be able to believe anyone about us, not even himself if he saw us in your soft bed. So the purpose of this one is obviously to conceal the extramarital love affair from the woman's husband. We'll see a real life example of magic relating to relationships coming up in a bit, but it's rather less romantic than this one. Medea, of course, we met in the previous episode on ancient Greece. The epic poetry of ancient Rome also features witchcraft in some cases. 2 very different examples are Dido in Virgil's Aeneid and Erichtho in Lucan's Civil War. Virgil's Aeneid is an epic poem written in the 1st century BCE. It is written apparently to honour the Emperor Augustus and to tell the story of the founding of Rome, but not the famous founding of Rome by Romulus and Remus, rather the founding of the village that will eventually become Rome by the Trojan hero Aeneas. During the poem, Aeneas, who is on his way from Troy to Italy, stops off in Carthage. Carthage is modern Tunis. Tunisia is Carthage. It was a huge empire that fought many, many wars with Rome, so they were familiar with Carthage as an old enemy, although they had thoroughly defeated Carthage by the time this poem was written. Carthage is, when Aeneas gets there, being ruled by a queen, Dido, and she has a relationship with Aeneas and she thinks they're going to get married, but then Aeneas tells her he has to go because the goddess Venus has told him he has to go to Italy and found what will eventually become Rome, and he has to marry somebody from there and he can't marry her. Dido is extremely upset. Dido then kills herself on her own funeral pyre, and as she does so, she curses Aeneas. So right before her suicide, she says this curse. O sun, you who illuminate all the works of this world, and you Juno, interpreter and knower of all my pain, and Hecate howled to in cities at midnight crossroads, you avenging furies and you gods of dying Elissa, acknowledge this, direct your righteous will to my troubles and hear my prayer. So there's a reference there to Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, also to the Furies who avenge people's wrongs. May he not enjoy his kingdom or the days he longed for, but let him die before his time and lie unburied on the sand. This I pray, these last words I pour out with my blood. She does frame this as a prayer, but she's also almost offering herself up as a human sacrifice for this curse. And human sacrifice was something the Romans very much associated with magic and with kind of barbarian foreign religions. So they associate it with druids and kind of barbaric religious practices from the druids, and they also associate it with magical practices. Dido is a very sympathetic character, though, despite the curse. Aeneas has done her wrong, poor Dido, and she's presented, I think, fairly sympathetically in the poem. When Aeneas goes to the underworld a little bit later, she refuses to talk to him, which I quite like. She's like, nope, I'm going back to my first husband who got murdered ages before. Very much not sympathetic is Erichtho in Lucan's Civil War. This poem is written in the 1st century CE. It is about the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey that had happened in the 1st century BCE. So this is very unusual as an ancient epic poem because it's not about mythology or legend. It's about actual historical events that were not quite in living memory at the time, but certainly not all that long ago, not compared to the founding of Rome by Trojans or whatever. So it's a very different type of epic poem, this poem. And it's got a very different type of witch in it. There's no visit to the underworld in this poem. There's just Erictho, the witch, who calls up a corpse from the battlefield. Sextus Pompey, who is a son of Pompey, wants to know how the war is going to go. So he goes to visit this witch, and she chooses a corpse very carefully. This is a very long description. It's very, very detailed. Erictho herself is the typical, stereotypical, ugly old woman witch. And she lives in graveyards, and she licks the blood off the nails from crucifixion victims. I'm not going to read like the whole section of the poem dedicated to Erictho because it's absolutely massive. I actually wrote my entire master's dissertation on this bit of this poem. But you can read it online at poetryandtranslation.com. Her ingredients are a very kind of interesting mix of things that might really have been part of magical practices. Things like the remora and the Aeneas, which are types of fish, and we're going to come back to fish in a bit, that you might really use in magical spells. Those might have been part of real magical practices. But they are in with the ashes of the phoenix. A phoenix, again, if you've ever found a phoenix, let me know, but I'm assuming a mythological creature. This is the bird that burns and then rises again from the ashes. So it's a real mix of the mythological and the fictional with probably real magical practices in there as well. So literature and poetry gives us some insight into magical practices, but we do have plenty of real-life evidence for magical practices as well. As in ancient Greece, there's lots of evidence for curse tablets and binding spells. So we saw these in episode 1. They were popular throughout the classical Greek period, and they continue to be popular throughout the Roman period. Here's an example of what they look like. This one is from Roman Britain, from the baths at the town that is now called Bath, after the bath. It is complaining about the theft of Vilbia, who is probably an enslaved woman. And a lot of them relate to theft, to cursing a thief, maybe trying to catch a thief, but often just cursing them because the person doesn't know who the thief is who's stolen whatever it is. It's not usually a person. It can be shoes or whatever. But because they don't know who's done the stealing, they can't punish them with human justice because they don't know who it is, and they haven't really got any way of finding out who it is unless they happen to have a witness. So they're asking the gods to curse whoever it is. It's a way of trying to get justice when you can't get justice. Other examples include a curse tablet found on West Hill in Gloucestershire, folded 6 times after the inscription, so they're often folded after the inscription is done. Honoratus to the holy god Mercury, I complain to your divinity that I have lost 2 wheels and 4 cows and many small belongings from my house. I would ask the genius of your divinity, that's like the spirit of the god, that you do not allow health to the person who has done me wrong, nor allow him to lie or sit or drink or eat, whether he is man or woman, whether boy or girl, whether slave or free, unless he brings my property to me and is reconciled with me. With renewed prayers, I ask your divinity that my petition may immediately make me vindicated by your majesty. Another one from Caerleon in Wales, from the northern part of the arena in Caerleon. Lady Nemesis, I give thee a cloak and a pair of boots. Let him who wore them not redeem them except with his life and blood. So that one is more about somebody where you know the person you want to curse. Here are his boots, and he can't have them back unless he gives his life and blood for them. Whoever he was, he'd really annoyed the person who did this curse. Nemesis is a goddess who, again, is about bringing justice. Nemesis will bring, good things to people who've been good and bad things to people who've been bad. So there's a real connection of these curse tablets with justice and with attempts to get justice in some way when it's not possible through human courts. As in ancient Greece, we also have examples of voodoo dolls, so not connected to Haitian voodoo or to hoodoo, but we call them that because they're very, very similar and it's the easiest way to just quickly name what they are. We saw these in episode 1 relating to ancient Greece, but the most famous voodoo doll from the ancient world is from the Roman period. It's known as the Louvre voodoo doll because the Louvre is where it is. You can see it here in this image. It is from Roman Egypt, from either the 2nd or 3rd century CE, and it's made of baked clay, and as you can see, the figure is, as in many of the Greek examples, bound. The hands are bound, the feet are bound, And it's also got these pins in the head, the eyes, the mouth, the breast, the hands and feet, and the private areas. This doll was found with an accompanying curse tablet, which has been translated by Daniel Ogden in his source book, Magic, Witchcraft and Ghosts in the Greek and Roman Worlds. So I'm going to read out some little bits of Ogden's translation, and this is nasty. This is nasty stuff. I won't read all of it because it's quite long. I deposit this binding spell with you, underworld gods, Pluto and Kore, Persephone, Urshigal, and Adonis. So Kore and Persephone, both two names for the same mythological character, and then they're being conflated with the names of characters and divinities from other areas as well. And it invokes several more people. Underworld Hermes Thoth, so that's conflating the Greek god Hermes with the Egyptian god Thoth. Something Greeks and Romans often did. They just assume that the gods are all the same gods and that different people have different names for them. So they assume that, for example, the god Amun is the god Zeus and the Egyptians just call him Amun. And it calls on various gods and divinities. It's a mixture of Greek and Egyptian and other North African gods. It calls on Anubis, holder of the keys to the underworld, and with you underworld demons, gods, untimely dead, male and female, lads and maidens, year on year, month on month, day on day, hour on hour, night on night. I adjure all you demons in this place to assist this demon Antinous. Antinous was the boyfriend of the Emperor Hadrian, who died in the river Nile in mysterious circumstances. The author Cassius Dio says that Hadrian sacrificed Antinous for a black magical rite. So it's possible Antinous was a human sacrifice for a magic ritual. I don't know if I believe that. I mean, he might have got drunk and fallen in the river, or been eaten by crocodiles or something. But that is certainly the rumour that was going around. Antinous then became the object of a mystery cult. That's a cult where you have to be initiated into the cult to learn its secrets. It's kind of like a secret society type thing. And Antinous became the object of one, along with the goddess Diana quite often. And he ended up being one of the most worshipped gods in the Roman world, partly because you can suck up to the emperor by worshipping his dead boyfriend. So it's not entirely clear whether this is the same Antinous. Bearing in mind the date and the fact it's in Egypt, it's very possible that this is a reference to Hadrian's Antinous. Demon is daimon. It's a spirit between gods and mortals. It's not the evil demon of later Christian legend. It's not necessarily like, it doesn't mean like wicked or bad. Although this spell is nasty. Rouse yourself for me and take yourself off to every district, every block, every house, and bind Ptolemaeus, to whom Aias gave birth. Ptolemaeus, the daughter of Hieronymus, so that she may not be screwed and may not be other things, and may not do anything that brings pleasure for a male companion except for me alone, Sarapamon, to whom Arrhea gave birth. Do not permit her to eat, drink, hold out, go out, or find sleep apart from me, Sarapamon, to whom Arrhea gave birth. I adjure you, Necudaimon, ghost demon, ghost daimon, Antinous, in the name that brings fear and trembling, the name at the sound of which the earth will open up, the name at the sound of which demons are seized with fear and terror, the name at the sound of which rivers and rocks are broken. It goes on adjuring Antinous for quite some time. Do not ignore me, Necudaimon Antinous, but rouse yourself for me and take yourself off to every district, every block, every house, and bring me Ptolemaeus, to whom Aias gave birth. Ptolemaeus, the daughter of Hieronymus. Restrain her food, her drink, until she comes to me, Sarapamon, to whom Arrhea gave birth, and do not permit her to be, lie with, shall we say, any other man, it's more graphic than that, than me alone, Sarapamon. Drag her by the hair, by the guts, until she no longer disdains me, Sarapamon, to whom Arrhea gave birth, and until I have her, Ptolemaeus, to whom Aias gave birth, Ptolemaeus, the daughter of Hieronymus, subservient to me for the full extent of my life, loving me, lusting after me, telling me what she has in her mind. If you do this, I will give you release. So it's actually binding the Necudaimon, as well as binding the woman, and promising to release the Necudaimon, the ghost demon, if it does what he wants. I mean, oh dear, this is horrible. Incels are not a new thing. Yeah, they just have new methods. Anyway. Voodoo dolls and curse tablets are not the only magical practices we have evidence for from ancient Rome. We also have the Greek Magical Papyri available in translation by Hans-Dieter Betz, written in Greek, but they all date from the Roman period. So this is a collection of spells, hymns and formulae for amulets found in Egypt, dating between the 2nd and 5th centuries CE, written in Greek primarily, but also in Coptic, which is the language of Egypt in this period, sort of combines Greek and Egyptian, and Demotic, which is the language of Egypt going back further. Demotic was the common language of Egypt, not the same as the hieroglyphics that you find on the pyramids, which are much, much older for starters, and is a more kind of elevated language, but this is the language people speak in Egypt, or spoke in Egypt. It's Demotic, and then Coptic, after the conquest of Alexander the Great, sort of blends elements of Greek and Demotic together. So they're in all three languages. The papyrus has obviously survived because it was in Egypt, so it's possible that this kind of thing existed in other parts of the Roman world, but we simply don't have the evidence for it. These include spells for all sorts of things. There are memory spells, spells to make people love or hate other people, spells for healing. One of them is a spell for removal of bones stuck in the throat. I love that one. I mean, I don't know how that one works. Surely you would just yank it out, but there you go. Contraceptive spells, of course. Along with all this love magic and erotic magic, you need contraception. Spells to open doors, a spell for going before a superior, a spell for causing favour, spells for removing poison, dream spells of various kinds, receiving a dream, sending dreams, spells to induce insomnia in other people, so that's like a curse really, lamp divination, a spell to keep bugs out of the house. I love that one, and I use incense quite regularly to try and discourage wasps and things, so I feel like that could be quite effective if it involved burning something. And an invisibility spell. I don't know if that one worked. And we mentioned amulets a couple of times. We also have lots of evidence for amulets from the Roman world. These are inscribed rolls of metal or gemstones worn as protection. You can also get amulets in shapes. Often phalluses with wings was a very popular apotropaic amulet. Something that's apotropaic is designed to ward off evil and also to bring good luck. It's a bit of a combination of both. You can also get them inscribed with more specific protections. They can protect in general, or they can protect against a specific disease, or they can protect against curse tablets, a sort of defense against the dark arts type thing. Here's an example, a thin sheet of gold, sorry the picture is black and white, inscribed with Greek letters and magical symbols. The text, written by a professional scribe for a man named Proclus, contains a spell to ensure his victory in a trial before the military governor of the Roman province of Arabia. It ends with a curse on his opponents whom he wishes silenced, subjugated and enslaved. It was tightly rolled and originally held inside a small capsule and worn around the neck as an amulet. A 2nd century CE author called Cyrenius wrote a text called Gynecology, which is about women's health and women's medicine, and he says, "Some people say that some things are effective by antipathy, such as the magnet and the Asian stone and hare's rennet, and certain other amulets to which we, on our own part, pay no attention. Yet one should not forbid their use, for even if the amulet has no direct effect, still through hope it will possibly make the patient more cheerful." So, really interesting that Cyrenius recognises the importance of somebody's mental health and well-being, even aside from their physical health, possibly even some recognition of the placebo effect as well. But what was the position of magic in Roman law? There were laws against certain magical acts from very, very early on. From the very earliest Roman laws, which come from early on in the Republican period, the 12 Tables, we have laws against whoever enchants away crops or lures away another's grain. They're quite specific to the act of theft, but theft by magical means, and they come with laws against theft in general. So basically, the thing that's illegal is stealing, but there is a law against stealing by magic as well as stealing by more ordinary means. The 12 Tables also include laws against mala carmina, wicked chants. So a carmina is songs, poetry, could be chants. Mala carmina, wicked, bad chants, is outlawed. So that seems to be something like a law against some kinds of magic. In the 1st century BCE, in 81 BCE, a law was passed which is called the Lex Cornelia de Sicarius et Veneficiis. or veneficius. Classical Latin, we pronounce the V's as W's. This is the Cornelian law concerning assassins and poisoners, passed under L. Cornelius Sulla, a Roman dictator in this period. So this is a law against murder, basically, against assassination by various means. The first section deals with assassins, sicarii. Then sections 2, 3 and 4 we don't have, unfortunately, any evidence for. But the fifth section, dealing with poisoners, venefici, dealt with a person who, for the purpose of killing a person, prepared, sold, bought, possessed or administered a dangerous drug, venenum malum. And then the sixth section concerned people who caused someone to be wrongfully condemned on a capital charge. This would seem to be concerned basically with poison, and obviously the Romans recognised the existence of poisons. If you feed somebody certain things, they die or get sick. Originally, this law doesn't seem to be a law against magic. It seems to be a law against murder. The fact that it includes venenum malum, dangerous drugs, does open it up to then be used to refer to magic potions. There's a very fine line in ancient thought between a drug or medicine and magic potion, because they're kind of the same thing, really. You take a bunch of ingredients and you maybe put them in a cauldron or something, whatever you do with them, and they have an effect. And we would differentiate between things that we have used scientific testing to work out what they do based on the laws of nature, and chucking a hare's runner in something, or a certain type of fish, or whatever it is. Although, you know, certain types of fish are poisonous, so you can see how it's a very, very fine line. And in the ancient world, there really wasn't much of a line between the two. And what seems to have happened is that this law was gradually expanded to cover more and more things that were more to do with magic, less to do with simply killing somebody. Killing somebody is illegal. That's what's illegal according to the original Lex Cornelia. But it gets expanded to start to cover magical practices. For example, a senatorial decree from the mid-2nd century CE decreed that anybody responsible for wicked sacrifices, mala sacrificia, should be condemned and punished under the Lex Cornelia. This may refer to human sacrifices, or it may just refer to sacrifices that are not part of proper religio and proper religion. Then later, we start to get more and more laws against, more specifically, magical practices. So we have a 3rd century CE text called the Opinions of Paulus. This was written by a legal expert called Paulus, and it sums up various laws and legal issues. So it's not a law itself, but it's a commentary and a summary of laws. What we have here is a summary of the summary, cobbled together from surviving bits and pieces in the 19th century, from a compilation summary that was written around 300 CE under the Emperor Diocletian. So the Opinions of Paulus talks about laws against abortificants and love potions. So specific potions are illegal, like amatorium poculum, love potion. It also says, those who perform or arrange for the performance of impious or nocturnal rites, sacra impia nocturnae, in order to enchant, obcanterent, transfix, defigurent, or bind, obligerent someone, shall either be crucified or thrown to the beasts. So this seems to be outlawing those binding spells and curses. And this is quite late, 3rd century CE. This is a fairly late summary. It also says, those who sacrifice a man or obtain omens from his blood, or pollute a shrine or a temple, shall be thrown to the beasts, or if persons of high status be punished capitally. So death penalty for human sacrifice. And then it goes on to say, it is agreed that those guilty of the magic art, magicae artis conscios, be inflicted with the supreme punishment, thrown to the beasts or crucified. Actual magicians, magi, will be burned alive. This certainly seems to imply that by the 3rd century CE, magic is being outlawed. And then it says, no one is permitted to have in their possession books of the magic art, libri artis magicae. Anyone in whose possession they are found shall have their property confiscated and the books publicly burnt, and they themselves should be deported to an island. Persons of low status shall be punished capitally. Not only is the profession of this art, but also the knowledge, scientia, prohibited. So what it looks like is that in the earlier periods of ancient Rome, there isn't a law against magic. There are laws against theft or against murder, and you can't do those things by magical means. But there aren't laws against magic itself, apart from maybe certain mala carmina. But over time, more and more laws get added, until eventually, by the time you get to the year 300, at the very beginning of the 4th century CE, magic itself has been outlawed. Now, we do know about one particular witchcraft trial from the Roman world, which is the trial of Apuleius. This took place in the 2nd century CE. So we're in between the two. We're in between the original laws that just cover murder and poisoning and theft, and the later laws that specifically cover magic. And we don't know for sure exactly what was or wasn't covered by law and what was or wasn't illegal in the period of this trial, and we can try and work it out. The information we have about the trial all comes from Apuleius' speech in his own defence. So, a quick introduction to Apuleius. My love. Before I met my husband, I used to say I was single because I was holding out for a 2,000-year-old Roman witch. I love Apuleius. He's great. He wrote a novel called Metamorphoses, which is often known as The Golden Ass, about a man who is messing around with a witch's stuff and turns into a donkey. So he's obviously interested in witchcraft himself. He wrote an entire novel about, or at least kicked off by, witchcraft. He also wrote philosophy. He wrote a text called On the God of Socrates, De Deo Socratis, and another small work on Plato. He wrote a book about oratory called Florida. Apuleius is a North African Roman citizen. So he came from modern Algeria, from Madauros, and he later lived in Carthage and in Ea. Ea is modern Libya. He studied philosophy in Athens. He was very well travelled. He'd also lived in Rome. And he is of mixed Roman and Berber heritage. His trial, of course, took place under Roman law. The background to the trial is quite the soap opera. Apuleius had, after living and travelling in Athens and Rome, settled in Carthage. He was on his way to visit Alexandria in Egypt when he fell ill near Ea, which is now Tripoli in Libya. He went to stay with an old friend of his called Pontianus, and he ended up marrying Pontianus's mother, Pudentilla. Women in the Roman world got married aged around 12 to 15, so there wasn't necessarily a massive age gap between Apuleius and Pudentilla. She was probably a bit older than him. Marrying your friend's mother isn't quite as strange, maybe, as it might sound now. Pontianus was married himself already, and his father-in-law, Hieronymus Rufinus, was angry that Pudentilla's money would now go to Apuleius. Her money would have been inherited by her son Pontianus, and therefore Hieronymus Rufinus's daughter would have been benefiting from the money. Now that Pudentilla has married Apuleius, she has decided that all the money is going to go to Apuleius, her husband, if and when she dies, and therefore Pontianus and his wife aren't getting so much. Then Pontianus died at sea. Pontianus's paternal uncle then accused Apuleius of murdering Pontianus. So this is Pontianus's father's brother. His father is obviously dead, that's why Apuleius has married his mother. Sicinius Aemilianus, his uncle, his father's brother, tried to accuse Apuleius of murdering Pontianus. He quickly dropped that, presumably because Pontianus died at sea. You know, it's quite hard. Yes, okay, Nero tried to have his mother killed with a collapsible boat, but you have to have the resources of an emperor to be able to pull off something like that. So trying to accuse somebody of murdering somebody who's died at sea is quite tricky. So instead, Rufinus Aemilianus and Pontianus's younger brother, his surviving younger brother, Sicinius Pudens, who of course is also no longer going to get as much money because it's going to Apuleius, accused Apuleius of bewitching his wife Pudentilla with magic in order to get his hands on her money, which is a capital offence. Aemilianus and Pudens spoke for the prosecution, and Apuleius spoke in his own defence. The trial was presided over by Claudius Maximus, who is probably the proconsul of North Africa, and who was a Stoic philosopher. All of this information we get from Apuleius' speech in his own defence, known as the Apologia. It's not completely clear what the charges against Apuleius were, but we can try and reconstruct it from his defence speech. They seem to have included maleficia, wicked deeds, trying to buy certain kinds of fish, remember the fish could be involved in magic spells, either for use in a poison or a love potion, presumably some kind of wenina. Various religious offences that may have been mala sacrificia, so not human sacrifice, unless they're suggesting he somehow got Pontianus killed, but they seem to have dropped that charge. So he's not being accused of human sacrifice, but it's possible that maybe other religious rituals might have come under that heading as well. And using carmina et wenina, so chants and potions to seduce Pudentilla. A lot of scholars think he was tried under the Lex Cornelia in its expanded form, although we don't know for sure. Apuleius also implies in his speech that he is charged with being a magus and of practicing magia. So not of being a Persian priest specifically, which obviously he isn't, but of being a magician. Magus seems to have come to mean magician by this point in time, 2nd century CE. His defence is based primarily around proving that he is a philosopher, not a magus. So the main thread of his defense speech is, I did this because I'm a philosopher. I did this because I'm a philosopher. I'm not a magician. I'm a philosopher. Especially because, of course, the magistrate presiding over the trial is also a philosopher. So he's trying to appeal to him. He has to defend himself on issues including buying particular types of fish because they were thought to be used in magic spells, owning a mirror despite being poor, keeping a secret figurine wrapped up among Pontianus's household gods, putting a slave boy into a trance, as well as writing poetry about the slave boy. And he has to explain why his wife grew to love him even though she didn't like him so much at first, and provide the full context of a quotation from one of her letters, where she had unfortunately said, yes, he's bewitched me, in a sarcastic type way, and that then that got taken literally. He has to use her letters because in Roman law, people who are very closely connected to the case can't appear as witnesses. This is because of the fear that they will just lie. If they're too closely connected to somebody who's on trial, then they can't be trusted, so there's no point calling them as witnesses. So he has to keep reading evidence from his wife's letters, and he can't just have his wife appear in court as a witness. People could speak in their own defence if they were the one being prosecuted, but he couldn't call witnesses who were too close to the case. And it's a very, very long speech. It's really, really interesting. There's a link in the description of a freely available modern translation of it. I definitely recommend you have a look at this speech if you have any interest in ancient magic at all. It is absolutely fascinating. I'm not going to read it all out here. It's very, very long. I will say his defence on the charge of keeping secret figurines wrapped up is that he's a member of a mystery cult, and he says, well, I can't give you all the details of a mystery cult because you can't know them unless you are initiated, but mystery cults are proper religio. They are accepted. Mystery cults are okay. So that is, he's saying this is acceptable, proper religion. It's normal religious practice. And then the rest of it, he just says it's all about philosophy. He's buying different types of fish because he's examining and learning about different types of fish. He also has a mirror because he's quite good looking and quite vain. This is why I love him. And as I say, he has to explain that his wife fell in love with him. And that's why they got married. It's a really good read. He says, Aemilianus' case was centred on this alone, that I am a magician. So I'd like to inquire of his most learned representatives, what is a magician? For if, as I read in so many authors, the magician in the language of the Persians is what the priest is in ours, what crime is there then in being a priest with solemn knowledge, skill and practice of the laws of the religious ceremonies, the dictates of the rites and the order of the divine services, especially if magic is as Plato interprets it, when he recalls the education that the Persians provide for the youth among them destined to rule. So Apuleius points out that a magus is actually a Persian priest. It's obviously kind of lost that meaning over time, but he knows it. He knows that that's its meaning. He expects Claudius Maximus to know that that's its meaning. He goes back to Plato, a much earlier conception of magic, in his defence, and also, of course, emphasising that he's a philosopher, not a magician. And he questions what magic is, and that's part of his defence, is to say, well, if you're accusing me of magic, what are you accusing me of exactly? Isn't that just religion? It's just part of religion. We assume that this was successful and that he was found not guilty. Some scholars have suggested he might have been found guilty, but he would have been executed and he wouldn't have published it. This is the thing with ancient legal speeches. We only ever have either the prosecution or the defence because you publish it if it's successful. And if it's not successful, you're not going to publish it. So this defence was successful, that he was a philosopher, not a magician, and that his wife married him because she loved him, and also because Pontianus had actually encouraged her to do so before he died, and not because he had seduced her with love potions. Apuleius also mentions Plato and the idea of daimones, and he asserts that divination and magic are controlled by these. So you can see the connection of the daimones with magic, which of course later feeds into Christian ideas associating magic with demons, because daimones slowly, over a very long period of time, became the demons of Christianity. However, even as Christianity took over in the 4th century CE and was more and more practiced throughout Europe, popular magic persisted, sometimes in ways medieval Christianity was okay with, sometimes outside of mainstream religion. So in the next episode, we will be looking at some early medieval magic. We'll be looking at some of the pagan magical traditions of Europe, and then going forward into later episodes, we'll start to look at later medieval Christian magic, which can be found in some surprising places and even within churches themselves. I hope you enjoyed this episode of A History of Witchcraft and Magic in Europe. If you did, please give it a like. Episodes go up roughly once a month, so subscribe to my channel and hit the bell for notifications to be notified of when the next episode goes up. And if you're interested in myth, legend, folklore, and weird and wonderful history in general, check out some of my other videos. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!